But let's get to the reason we're all here. Tonight's speaker, Robbie Baxter. I've got to know her a fair bit over the last few years. She's very good at what she does. She's a strategy consultant at Peninsula Strategies. She, back in the day, was director of marketing at my CFO, which is actually like right here, right? I remember that. She's a graduate of Harvard undergrad and Stanford Business School. And she wrote the book, The Membership Economy, here, that she's going to be sharing some advice with us tonight. Her Twitter handle, again, is Robbie Bax, if you want to put that in your tweets. But please join me in giving a warm welcome to Robbie Baxter. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the warm welcome. I'm going to let him get me set up here. So I wanted to start by just asking people to think about organizations of which you feel like you're a member. And since we're kind of a small group, you can just go ahead and shout it out, and I'll just repeat what I hear. I'll start over here, just like in the High Holy Days for those of you who are members of the tribe. What? Look back. Quizlet, Quora, Reddit. Anybody a member of the library? And I'm not going to give all the answers, but yeah, remember? What? Home and School Club for your kids' school. That sounds exciting. HBO Go? Amazon Prime. The YMCA. Want to quit the gym, but you're a member and you pay every month. So, when you think about what you're a member of, it's funny, but there's a lot of really different kinds of organizations that come up. So you guys mentioned some of these. Nobody mentioned AARP. Not sure why. And, but there's, you look at this and there's LinkedIn, there's Netflix, Marketo, Facebook, Pinterest, Weight Watchers. Nobody mentioned that one either. All different kinds of organizations that elicit feelings of belonging and being a member. One of my favorites for a long time has been Netflix. And I actually kind of got my start thinking about membership when I was consulting with them about 15 years ago. And I had already fallen in love with their business as a consumer. I loved getting 3 DVDs out at a time. I loved always having something to watch. I loved that they had a queue. And I love that they seem to be, getting to know me and my needs and giving me recommendations. So it was one of the first organizations that had a recommendation engine. And their real focus on solving one problem for the customer was something that I appreciated as a consumer. If the way that I paraphrase it, it was about providing consumers with the most efficient way to receive video content that's professionally created with cost certainty. And what's been really interesting is that over the years, as they've changed their model, that mission has stayed constant. So first it was 3 DVDs out at a time. Then it was, they added streaming. Now they create their own content. But the mission of cost certainty, professionally created video content has stayed consistent. And that's really what's at the heart of this thing that I call a membership economy. And it was what made me fall in love with this business model. And when I was working with Netflix, I started to see all these things that they were doing, the way they thought about acquisition, the way they measured retention, the way that they thought about what it was that they did, and their willingness to explore lots of different ways to reach people, lots of different ways to deliver to people, at the same time as being incredibly focused on doing one thing. So over the time that I was there, I was doing a lot of work in acquisitions and in business development. We didn't do gaming, not interested. User-generated content, not interested. And a lot of organizations that I'd worked with in the past kind of, followed every shiny object. Like, wow, that looks interesting. Our customers might like that, or that looks interesting. We could make money there. And Netflix had this one focus on doing one thing really well forever. And I think of that as like a forever transaction. So as I was falling in love with the Netflix business model, other people were too. And as a consultant, I started getting calls from people saying, hey, we want to be the Netflix of news, or we want to be the Netflix of music, or we want to be the Netflix of software, or we want to be the Netflix of bicycles, or we want to be the Netflix of dental hygiene products. You can pretty much fill in the blank. Everybody wanted to get on like the Netflix bus. And I started to see patterns in the companies that I was working with. and trends and things that you could do that would be kind of best practices in the way that you marketed, in the way that you developed product, in the way that you ran operations, kind of going down the list of all the functional areas. Each one was different when you were, using subscription, thinking about community, focused on a long-term formal relationship with the customer. And so I called that the membership economy. So what really defines membership economy? For me, it's 4 things. The first one is about a massive transformation from ownership to access. So that's something, all of you here, I assume all of you are in kind of SaaS area. That's one major transition from the idea of owning something to the idea of having access to it, which means no more burden of ownership, maintenance, responsibility, and so on. Second one, which comes right out of moving to access, is instead of having a one-time gigantic payment, you have lots of small payments. And this is good on both sides. Again, for the consumer or the customer, less commitment up front, more flexibility, and for the organization, the holy grail of pretty much all businesses, which is recurring revenue. Third thing in the membership economy is a move from anonymous transactions to known relationships. So a subscription is just a pricing decision. In membership, it's really about knowing the people that you're serving and creating customized experiences and also kind of having their back for the long term. And the last one is a move from one-way communication, which I think of as kind of the loudspeaker approach to marketing. Yell loud enough and then they'll hear you and maybe a few people will stop, to multi-directional communication under the umbrella of the brand. So, that's a very different way of thinking about how communication happens. When you put them all together, you have all kinds of opportunities to create deeper, stronger, longer-lasting relationships with your customers. Not every company that's part of the membership economy has used all of them, but I would argue that as organizations mature, they do move toward having all 4. So, for a lot of SaaS companies that I've worked with, they're really great at the first 2, so-so at relationship, so-so at community. But it really depends, and we'll get more into some examples as we go along. It's easy to see why organizations are interested in membership economy. Recurring revenue is, it changes your valuation. For those of you who are entrepreneurs, I'm sure you're very familiar with this, kind of like 4 to 5 times what it would be if it was based on one-time transactions. But what's also important is to consider the other side. So something that I found really interesting, as Dan mentioned, I work with a lot of companies as a consultant, and I get a lot of calls from people who say, hey, we want to do subscription. We're transactional today. We want to move to a subscription model. We want to move to a SaaS model. And when I ask the entrepreneurs, why do you want to do that? A lot of times I'm really surprised to hear the answer being, well, we want to have recurring revenue and we want to have a higher valuation. And that's kind of where the conversation draws to that awkward, yeah, exactly. It's like, we're in it for the money. And then you say, well, what's in it for the customers? And there's like a blank face. Like, well, they're going to have to do it because if they want our products, that's the only way we're going to make it possible for them. So they'll just either subscribe or they'll be out of luck. And we think that they like our product enough because our product is so good that they will just shut up and subscribe. And, it's, not every company is like this, but there is this idea that like subscription is so valuable that a lot of times companies don't think, well, what's the other side? A subscription is forever, right? And so what is good enough that it would make you say, I'm going to take off my consumer hat, put on my member hat, and not think about, what I'm spending every month, every year, because I trust this organization. That's really what's happening here. So you really need to be between what's in it for us, what's in it for them. A kind of side point, I work with a lot of professional associations, and a lot of times they're on the other side of the spectrum. They're so focused on what they're doing for their members because their members yell so loudly at them, we want this, we need that, it's really important, that they start building products and services that their members are unwilling to pay extra for. And then they get in this position where they're creating stuff that people aren't willing to pay for. So ideally, you want to be in the middle. Now, when you're thinking about what's in it for the customer or what's in it for them, a place that I like to spend time at the beginning is to think about kind of basic human needs. So, for those of you that took psychology classes in college, Abraham Maslow had this idea that there was a hierarchy of needs that all human beings share. And at the bottom of that are your basic physiological needs, things like food, shelter, Wi-Fi, things that you can't live without. And over time, you move up the pyramid. So once your physiological needs are met, then you start to think about safety. How do I make sure the lions aren't going to eat my children? How do I make sure that I have insurance in case of an earthquake? How do I make sure that the product I buy is not going to get me fired? Those kinds of things. And then you move into social, which is like having your Cheers bar experience where you walk in and people say, hey, Robbie, how are the kids? Do you want the usual? Or maybe they don't even ask me if I want the usual. They just put it in front of me. That feeling of being known and accepted is really important. And in our kind of increasingly disconnected lives, it's becoming more and more valuable to find places where you feel recognized and like you belong. Once you have belonging, you want to be held in high regard. It's not just enough that people know my name, they have to think I'm great also. And so esteem is really about being held in high regard, either for your achievements or for your contributions. And then finally, when all of this has been taken care of, you can stop thinking about basic mundane things and focus on becoming your highest and best self, reaching your full potential, doing the things that are really meaningful to you. So I would argue that just about every organization at their core is tapping into one or more of these elements. And the higher you go, the more meaningful it is for the people you serve and the deeper the connection. And when you layer in subscription and membership on top of this, it becomes even more critical because membership is about the long-term relationship, and these are long-term goals. We want these forever. So this is not a new concept, right? We have Charles Dickens, who sold his books with a subscription model. Fraternities and sororities have been having membership forever. Even longer than fraternities and sororities are trade guilds, professional associations, and societies. Membership is what we feel when we practice religion in group and public settings with others. Membership is, for better or worse, how we feel at family gatherings. And membership is what makes us root for a team where we don't know the players, we may not even know how to play the game, and to feel a little bit connected to people who wear the same logo, even if we haven't ever spoken to them before. It raises our level of trust just because they like the same team. We see this kind of membership mindset across virtually every industry. So I'll just go through these, quickly, but I'm happy, we're going to have ample question and answer time. So if there's things you want to talk about, I'm happy to go into more detail. But, there's online communities. There's mainstream businesses that have been around for a while that are focused on, that have subscription models like American Express. Membership has its privileges. Their whole business model was based on, we have your back. I talked to the CEO of American Express Consumer when I was writing my book, and he said, that's pretty much our whole business model is we have your back. We charge more. We charge more to the consumer. We charge more to the business, to the merchant. But at the end of the day, if you have a problem, we're going to handle it better than anybody else, and we're going to take care of our customers, and that's why people stay with us. Small businesses and consultancies. So some of you I know are entrepreneurs and might say, well, we can't afford to build membership. We can't afford to do the kinds of things you're talking about. But I wanted to share a couple of examples. Kepler's in Menlo Park is now run almost entirely on a membership model. So what they realized was their Forever Promise, which is a place for people to discover new ideas and connect with others who have similar ideas, is still what they're doing. But what has happened is that it used to be that you would solve that problem by buying books, and now you buying books in a bookstore. Now you solve that problem by, for most people, going onto Amazon. So what they do now is they take advantage of their form factor, which is in-person gatherings, and most of their revenue comes in from their events. So they have, I think they told me, 275 events a year. In addition, they have all kinds of like book clubs and other kinds of gatherings in schools and among local other community groups. Alan Weiss is a solo consultant that has a 8-figure practice with no staff, built on online communities, live events, and content subscriptions. SaaS is, kind of the topic of the day. Nonprofits, professional societies, and trade associations were kind of the first ones to really engage in membership. And I would argue that they're dealing with challenges of having everybody else infringe on their turf and take away some of the benefits. So a lot of software companies now, for example, have become de facto professional associations where people with the same job title gather around the SaaS platform that serves their space. So that becomes where they connect with other people that have similar jobs, talk about career potential, build trust, get brainstorms, get ideas, get inspiration, get help with problems. And then the last, then I have organizations with loyalty programs. This was kind of the gateway for membership, mostly retailers and hospitality, travel. I would argue that they kind of have been stuck in a rut as well. So they call themselves loyalty programs, but I would argue that it's not really about loyalty. It's about financial transaction where we are rewarded for the frequency and depth of our purchases with these organizations, and it has nothing to do with how we feel about the organizations so much as a financial decision where we say, okay, I'm going to fly 100,000 miles this year. United is the biggest biggest hub in my area. I guess I'm going to fly United because eventually I'll get free upgrades. And then the last one is consumer product companies. I won't talk about that too much with this group, but one of the things that I found really interesting of late is the explosion in subscriptions of physical products, both in terms of subscription boxes and replenishment models. So that's like Amazon Subscribe and Save or Dollar Shave Club versus Birchbox, Pop Sugar, BarkBox, which are more about discovery. And also now this also emerging category of a physical product that you can subscribe to, like the Peloton bike, like I think it's Tavola, the oven that you can subscribe to, or Nest. So lots of different examples, just to give you a sense of the kinds of organizations that are using these same principles. So why is all of this happening now? I would argue that technology is extending the infrastructure that enables trusting relationships. The fact that you can serve software, serve content, that people can create their own content and share it at virtually no cost and access it from anywhere is creating different opportunities for people to build trusting relationships. It used to be that you wouldn't want to buy something from someone you didn't know. Now, we can go online, we can subscribe, we can buy pretty sophisticated software without ever talking to a human being or knowing anybody at the organization. It's really changing the way people think about what they can do themselves versus having to go through experts who know experts. I want to make a distinction between subscription and membership because a lot of times, when I was writing the book and when I talk to people, they often will say, so you're talking about subscriptions, right? That's what this is all about. All of the companies you talk about have subscriptions. But the thing that I realized is that subscription is a pricing decision. It's a financial decision. It says instead of selling it all at once in one big hunk, we're going to, offer people an annual fee to pay to have access to something. That's a pricing and packaging decision. I would argue that membership is a mindset, and some organizations have it. It's a sense that your customers, your members, are in it for the long term with you, and that as long as you don't take advantage of them, upset them, and as long as their needs don't massively change, like I moved away from the gym so I can no longer attend this gym, or I retired from my job so I no longer need to subscribe to this work-related software solution. Otherwise, people are going to stay forever. And at the heart of that is this idea that I've been alluding to, a forever transaction, which is really that moment when somebody says, you're the ones I'm going to work with. I've solved this problem. I'm going to achieve my goals with this organization, and I'm going to check that off my list, and I'm going to go to the next thing. I've taken care of something kind of basic, and I'm moving up to the next thing. So this is something that I no longer have to worry about. So, this first part of my presentation is mostly, it's fairly general about the membership economy, about the book. And the rest of the talk is really going to be much more focused on SaaS and what it means for you. So when you're thinking as a product person, there's a whole bunch of things that change when you're operating with that as a service as opposed to as a product that you own. The first thing, of course, is that it's a subscription, so people easy come, easy go. So it's a lighter product to sell, and it's a lighter product to cancel. Also, people generally, in many cases, aren't as technical who are making the buying decisions, so the tie to the business value has to be much more obvious, and the interest in the widgets are less, the how you did it is less interesting. So, they talk about, when new technology is created, people are interested in how it works and how do you build it. And then over time, people say, I don't really care how you built it, and I don't really care about it. I just want to know if it does the things I needed to do. What are the benefits? What are the features for me? The other thing is that in a forever transaction, people are expecting you to solve the problem in the best way you can. So just in the same way, for example, that Netflix went from DVDs to streaming, and in the beginning, they did not change the pricing for it. And if you want to go into detail on their whole pricing saga, I'm glad to give you my perspective on that. But originally, they just transitioned seamlessly into this new offering. And you see that with lots of other organizations as they introduce new offerings. Sometimes they don't even announce it. They just feed it in. SurveyMonkey does this. LinkedIn does this. As a way of providing continuous value to the consumer. So if you think of a really basic example, like your gym, somebody brought up loving the gym or hating the gym or something, and said, I go to the gym every week. I've taken off my consumer hat. I've put on my member hat. This is my gym. I don't look for alternatives. I haven't set foot in a gym other than mine in years. But then for some reason, let's say my gym is closed, and I realize, and I go to another gym, and I realize, wow, they haven't updated. They're still offering jazzercise here. They haven't gotten to Zumba. They don't offer SoulCycle. They don't offer CrossFit. The equipment is 20 years old. There's all this new equipment. I had no idea because I was trusting them, and I wasn't educating myself about what else was out there because I trusted them. And now that I realize that they haven't been keeping up, I'm going to take off my blinders, and I'm going to become a consumer again. I'm going to look for another alternative. And when I do, I'm going to tell everybody I know about how cheated I felt at the last place. So there's an obligation on the part of the product owners to keep iterating and to keep making it new at the same time as making it feel seamless. So when I started as a product manager, more than 5 years ago, we had product releases like every 18 months, and it was a really big deal, and there was like this golden CD, and you're like, ta-da, this is it, and it was done, and we announced it, and we got new customers because of it, because they were waiting for the next release, and it was a really big deal. All of our marketing was built around it, and now not only isn't that the case, but if your product looks too different, the people using the product are going to take off their blinders and say, like, wait, this is not what I am familiar with. This is different. If it's different, then I probably need to reevaluate because this might not be for me anymore. So the ideal is to keep iterating, but without them feeling like they have to stop what they're doing and go back and reconsider this particular decision. Make sense? Yeah. So at this point, I want to give you a chance to kind of engage with your own situation. So I'd like you to, if you have a piece of paper or if you want to do it on your phone, think about your subscribers, the people that you serve, and think about which ones would benefit the most from having a forever transaction with you. Where if you said to them, we're going to have your back in this particular area forever, and you're going to agree to pay us forever, which of your customers would say, thank God, that's exactly what we've been waiting for you to say, if you can just focus on us? So I'll give you just a minute to think about that. And then I'm going to ask people to volunteer, and I'm going to give away a book if somebody volunteers. So. Yeah, because we're recording. So even if your voice is really booming, it'd be great if you could talk into the mic. So maybe I can get 2 or 3 responses.
The service that we're creating is designed for exactly this. So I would hope that it would be all of our clients. And what we're doing is creating a wealth advisory service that extends the full life cycle of an individual and tracking how they're performing relative to where they should be in all of this. And so that's going to be part of the entire marketing pitch of what we're doing. So I don't know if I'm answering the
Yeah,
question.
so that's a good start. The questions that I would be thinking about if I were, and I worked with my CFO a million years ago and sort of know just enough probably to be dangerous in this category. But I would be thinking about, are they really affluent? Are they just getting started? The questions that someone's dealing with when they're close to retirement are really different than the ones when they're just getting started.
Persona type thing.
Persona type things.
Right. So I would say that this is a class of individuals who have not gained enough wealth yet to integrate with a wealth manager of sorts, and probably less than $100,000, maybe $50,000 in assets. We bring them on early on in the process and drive that as a forever.
Awesome,
price.
awesome. Did you see the article, I think it was today in the Wall Street Journal, about the demise of financial advisors and how they're all worried that it's going to be replaced by technology? So yeah, so that's interesting. And he's the one to do it. So if you are young and you are thinking about wealth management for the long term, go right there. Another example? Yeah.
I was thinking about transaction costs, that if you're a big giant, you normally say that it's harder to change. If you do something wrong, it's kind of more expensive to back off and redo it.
Yep.
So forever is a big question. So I'm thinking of, like, in terms of our clients or customers, I'm thinking of the big giants who are doing something completely different.
So you're a B2B, you have a B2B SaaS.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm talking from a B2B SaaS perspective.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So like the big giants, if you're a small startup, you can shop around, and if you want to change, it's cheaper. Maybe you even like variety. But if you're a big giant, you're kind of stable what you do. So you're not interested in kind of like changing your core business model, and you really want to have something that you can invest in because it's so expensive to change.
Right. Yeah. Right. So she's talking about people that are in it for the long term. And I love that. And I have a story to share. So actually, I think I have it later, so I'm going to hold off. I'm not going to tell you my story. I'm going to keep you in suspense. But what's really interesting about what you said is that when you have B2B and you're thinking about this question, you want to think both about the company and you want to think about the buyer and the person that's going to have to use the offering, because all three of them have to be bought in for it to be forever. Because what I've seen is that even in the cases where the product's been purchased, so let's say you purchase it, if it's not implemented, that's like the first big hurdle, right? You buy it and then people kind of a little bit implement it, but the people are reluctant to use it and they still use their other ways, and so it's not used in a full featured way. And the other thing that happens is that the champion goes to another organization and there's nobody there, and then the budgeting comes up and somebody says, do we really need to keep this, or is there something else we can do that's less expensive? So getting your relationships established at all of those levels where it's a really high stakes situation is a great strategy. So I like the way you're thinking. Yeah, one more, and then we'll keep going. Oh, there's one here. Sorry, right here.
My answer is kind of similar. If the switching cost is really high, or the customer really care about continuity or consistency of the services, then this would work.
Yeah, switching costs are high, and the customer really cares about continuity, which brings up another issue, which is I work with a lot of organizations who say, our product's too expensive. That's the feedback that we're getting. And one of the things that I've seen is that anytime someone says your product's too expensive, what they really mean is it's not worth it. Because it's very rare that an organization or an individual is actually reaching into their pocket or into their budget for their last nickel. It's more that they're looking at what you're offering and they're saying, that's not really critical to my mission. That's not going to make me look good. That's not going to make my company succeed given the cost. And so if you get an organization or an individual who's really clear on the value proposition, they're not going to be as price sensitive. They're going to be loyal, and they're going to say, and I think probably everybody has clients like this, or hopefully you do, where they say, I don't care really what you charge within a range because the value is so high for me. The value of not having to look elsewhere, the value of knowing that it's going to work every time, the value of not having to start over. So yeah, absolutely. These are great. after you've kind of figured out who you're going to reach and what your offering is, I usually guide organizations through these 7 steps to consider different ways to deepen the relationship that they have with their customer. So the first one is organizational. So I talked to recently to a venture partner at a mezzanine stage firm, and he was talking about companies that he's worked with that have gone from licensing models to SaaS models. And he said, almost every single time that we're with a company that switches, they have to hire a whole new staff because they have a whole new set of metrics that matter. And the way that they operate, the kind of people they need on the product team, the kind of people they need in sales, the kind of people they need in marketing all change, and the metrics that matter change. So maybe acquisition isn't as important as retention, more of a focus on lifetime value. Engagement becomes a leading indicator. So a lot of organizations right away can say, yeah, retention's the most important thing, but then engagement's almost always the leading indicator. So how are they using it? Are they using your products and services in the way that they should be that would make them loyal? Because if they're not, you want to fix that as soon as you can. So, metrics, how processes work in the organization, also the blurring of lines across functional areas. So, the distinction when you think about, developing a product, the distinction between product management, marketing, customer success, and how, and even sales, and how they all start to work kind of together, and how much harder it gets to have this siloed, hand over the project to the next person and have them take care of it. So that's the first thing. The next one is the way that we think about the funnel. So I think there are a bunch of you that were in marketing that are here, and the traditional sales and marketing funnel starts with awareness, then that you get them to try it, then they pay, you have a transaction, and then you go out and you do it again because you're done. In the membership economy, the transaction is not the finish line, it's the starting line. When you have a SaaS relationship, the sale is kind of easy. And you see that, in selling organizations moving from big game hunters who go out and come back with 7-figure deals and kind of drop the carcass, on the floor and leave it for everybody else to deal with while they go out and find a new company to sign, to more of a model of a gardener, a farmer who's building these relationships over time and going from the tiny nut to the big oak tree. So that's really changing, and what happens after the moment of transaction becomes way more important than what happens before the moment of transaction. Another thing that I work on with organizations is pricing strategies. So I would guess most of you have some kind of a subscription model since you're theoretically all SaaS companies. But questions come up like, how many different tiers should you have? And should those tiers be based on depth and volume, or should they be based on service level, or should they be based on different industries or different need states or different personas? So thinking about that. And then there's a whole bunch of other kinds of pricing models that can be considered. So that's always useful to think about in the membership model. The rule of thumb that I think about in pricing is that the more complicated the pricing model is, the less your client is going to trust you. So you just, you want to, I worked with a company, I'm not going to name them, a SaaS company, and they had a 3-page guide for how to price. Like, well, if they want this feature, if they're this size, if they're from this industry, if they're on the East Coast, if they're on the West Coast, if they buy, at the end of the quarter, if they buy at the beginning of the quarter, it was like such a crazy thing. And every single step made sense. You could totally see why, either because it was on a cost basis, or because it was something that the company wanted them to do, or because they said, well, if this customer found out that this customer is getting the same price, they would feel like that wasn't fair. But it was so confusing, and often the salespeople would have to run, they have to run the pricing several times, and it was really hard for them to explain it. And whenever you have a hard time explaining something, it makes it look like you're lying. So, if, for those of you that have teenagers, you know that really well. Freemium. So how many people here use a freemium model where some people get it free forever and some people pay forever? So that's different from a free trial. I see some hands like kind of not sure. So a free trial means there's a delicious thing and I don't know what it tastes like. So you give them a bite so that they know how amazing it is and then they buy it. A freemium model is like hamburger forever, right? You're always going to be full, but it's not necessarily the finest thing you know how to make. So you want to know which one it is that you're offering and what goals you're trying to achieve with, giving stuff away. What are you getting in return? Onboarding is about what happens in the first seconds, minutes, weeks that somebody subscribes. How are they brought on? A lot of times in SaaS businesses, the person who makes the buying decision is different than the person who has to use the offering. And so how do you smooth out that transition and make sure that engagement is high? Also, for those of you that are more on the consumer side, for me, when I subscribe to something, the first thing I do is make a note to myself for when to cancel. There's a company, the company Truebill? So their whole model is based on tracking your subscriptions so you know when to cancel, right? And what phone number to use to call, so that in case somebody's hiding the cancel button, which I know nobody here does, you know how to find the company and get out of your agreement. Customer success is one of the many things that changes in an organization when they move to a SaaS model. It's to support this idea that the transaction's the starting line. So if the transaction's the starting line, who's going to be the coach running the race? And that's really the customer success team that's responsible not just for onboarding, but for what happens on an ongoing basis, tracking engagement, making sure customers are referenceable, and expanding the footprint, because that's a big part of a SaaS model, is that it's very easy for it to expand. It's easy to start small and grow, but then you have to make sure that you're helping them to grow. And finally, technology. And I know everybody in here is probably some kind or other of technologists, but what I think is really interesting is that technology is changing so quickly, and a lot of it is happening in the very large companies for consumers. And a B2B buyer is just a consumer at work. And so they come to work thinking that the products and services that they're buying should be able to do all the same things that, Facebook can do for them, or Amazon. Like, why can't I get this feature? Why isn't it personalized for me? Why isn't it making recommendations for me? All of the things that they've learned to expect in one place, they're going to expect in other places, even if you try to tell them, well, that's actually on our product roadmap, for some time in the near future, but no specific date. It's at the bottom of the Excel spreadsheet right now, and it only got a 4. So, these are some of the things to think about. I want to focus on a couple of them. One of them is the funnel, and this idea that you don't want to turn on the loudspeaker until you're absolutely sure that people are going to love the message. So I always say start first with an airplane test. Make sure that if you had a half an hour to explain it to a qualified buyer on an airplane, they would be ready to give you their money before the plane landed. That means that you have product market fit, which I know is something that Dan talks about a lot, very, very well. I've learned a lot from him on that. And then only after that do you want to figure out what is the right message that resonates. And then only after you know the message resonates do you want to turn on a loudspeaker. And another complaint about nameless clients is that a lot of times they've got the product's not even ready. They don't know if people like the product, but they want to get the word out there because they've heard Reid Hoffman say, if you're not embarrassed about your product, you're releasing it, you're going to market too late. And I would argue that what he means by that is that you should be getting feedback really early. You should be showing it to people with the understanding that it's not done. You should be trying things, testing, iterating, not that you should go out with your full wad of cash with a product that is embarrassing. Pricing, I wanted to share with you some of the different kinds of pricing models that I've seen overlaid onto a subscription. A la carte services, which are things like, if you want to help them with onboarding and they want you on site because even though it's not necessary, it makes them feel better, or you want to do an audit, or you want to do something else that's going to help them, kind of give them a little bump, a little burst of confidence. Ancillary products that enhance the membership experience. So, if you're a music company, you might provide earphones. That's an extra revenue stream. Partnership streams. I know a lot of organizations here do that, where you share the revenue that's being generated with a partner that has a related product or service. Aggregated analytics is something that can be sometimes more valuable than the offering itself, in terms of the intelligence that it provides, in terms of the recommendations it can provide, and in terms of benchmarking that it can provide for the people you serve. Advertising is self-explanatory. Free, I know it's not a price, but it is an important element of any pricing strategy. So I would encourage you, if you haven't considered it, to give it some real thought and some analysis about how can you incorporate free into your business model and what would it do for you. Another thing to think about that I think is really important is onboarding. And the problem with throwing it over the wall. I've worked at a lot of organizations where a sales happens and then the onboarding team and customer success is told to onboard them. And in a lot of cases, there's a lot of information that is lost between those two steps. It goes from the salesperson and the buyer to the customer success person and the person who has to use the product and services, who might not have been involved in the buying process, who's thinking to themselves, this is a SaaS product, we're going to get it out of here in a year. I'm just going to ignore it and use my Excel spreadsheet until they leave and I get my budget back. So, to solve against that, you really want to understand how do you engage the users in the first, days and weeks that they're using the offering. And one example I wanted to share, I did some work with the company OpenGov, and they provide a business visualization, budget visualization software for small municipalities. And they had been doing onboarding for a little while. This was in the pretty early days. And we sat down and we wanted to look at, what trends do we see among the people that are actually loving the product, that are actually subscribing, that are expanding, that are serving as great references? What do they have in common? What did they have in common in the onboarding experience versus everybody else? And I worked with the customer success manager, and we went through all the customers. We said, okay, these are the ones that are actually our best customers, that are paying well, that are references, that are doing all these good things. These are the kind of not as good ones that need work. What are the and I said, what were the differences? If you look at this list in the onboarding process, does anything come to mind? Do you have any hypotheses? And she said, well, the good customers were all really, really pain in the neck to deal with when we were onboarding, which I thought was really surprising. She said, those are our worst. She goes, those were my nightmares. She goes, those were the ones that called really late at night. Those were the ones that yelled at me. Those were the ones that wanted to know why this feature or that feature didn't work the way it was supposed to. They wanted their whole teams to get trained. They wanted me to come out there. And what we realized when we were talking about it is that and I think you in the front row brought this up, that an early indicator of a great SaaS customer is that they're taking it really seriously. They're saying, we're going to figure this out. We're not going to be able to switch. We want to use this. And, when you have that situation where you're like, look, I don't care what it costs. I just want to make sure I know how to use this. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I could be really nice and nod and tell you thank you and walk away and not use your offering and go back to Excel. But I'm not, because I actually care about the product. So that was actually really helpful, because the way that they think about onboarding now is they're very focused on making sure that everybody's in the room, that all the questions have been answered, that you bring sales and customer success and the buyer and the team all together in a room, that you resell the product for the people that are going to have to use it so they fully understand the rationale, and that all of that pays off in the long term. The last example I wanted to share is around customer success. And, I thought this was sort of a funny picture because, the customer support guy's wearing a tie and the customer success guy's not wearing a tie. And, customer success guy seems more approachable, even though it's the exact same guy in the exact same moment. But the idea is that you're really focused on helping them thrive rather than waiting for them to complain. And one of the things I wanted to point out, since a lot of you are product managers, is that, the best customer success organizations are actually constantly feeding stuff back that should be in the product. So in a perfect world, there is no customer success team, because the product is so good and so self-explanatory and so desirable that you don't need anybody to help you get up to speed. You don't need anybody to make sure you're using it. So a product that I like that does not need customer success is chocolate. Right? I don't need anybody to tell me how to enjoy chocolate. I don't need anyone to remind me that I should be enjoying chocolate's wonderful features. I just eat it. And, the Adaptive Insights has multiple levels of customer success. And at one end are the very customized, seven-figure deals that get personalized, dedicated attention and periodic business reviews and stuff like that. And then at the other end are the ones that are mostly automated. And what the person who runs that group told me was that having both actually allows them to productize features. It's kind of like at one end you have this concierge who's like, tell me what you need and we will make it happen, even if we have to use, paper clips and bubble gum. And at the other end, they're automating it and eventually incorporating it back into the product. And so that kind of mindset of taking the feedback that's coming from the field through the customer success team and going down from, tier 1 down to tier 5, and then into the product is a really virtuous cycle. So I'll pause again and give you a chance to think about, what we've been talking about, and in terms of your organization, if you're moving more and more toward membership and more towards this kind of iterative, forever relationship, are there parts of the organization where you'd say, you know what, we need, we need, certainly not the product team, but we need sales to be more like this, or we need customer success to be more like this, or we need to measure something differently? I'll give you a minute to think, and then I'll again ask for ideas. Okay, does anybody have a thought that comes right up about something that would make for a stronger relationship with the customer or a faster product cycle? Yeah.
Some way of rewarding them for doing something that makes them feel good, like bringing in their friends, and also helps us to grow and serve more people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the idea of incorporating some kind of reward, intrinsic reward, that helps to encourage the kinds of behaviors that you want to see in your best customers. I think that's right. The way that I think about it is you're kind of manufacturing best customers by saying, what do our best customers look like? What kind of behaviors did they have when they were onboarded? What have they done over time that makes them a great customer? And how can we incentivize and enable and make it easy for other people to follow that particular path? So, for example, he was talking about referrals. Well, if you can build in the referral, the referral process into the product itself, instead of them having to pick up the phone, you're more likely to get referrals. If you want to reward them for sharing documents, you can either track the documents, or you can give them status within a community if there's a community, or you can call them. I mean, I always think with any kind of initiative like that, on one end is the concierge model, on the other one is the automated. So you can call somebody and say, hey, we noticed that you're using all the features, or that you're sharing documents more than anyone else, or you're, using, the exact process that creates the most value, and we just want to thank you, or we want to feature you, or we want to invite you to speak, or we want to invite you back to our company so that you can talk to our team, and we want to treat you like an honored advisor. There's a million ways to recognize people for their contribution, right? We go back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's belonging, and then there's also giving people status for their contributions or for their achievements. And that's something that can be done in a very automated way, or it can be done in a one-off way until you figure out what systems you want.
Clout,
Mm-hmm.
when they first launched, they had just really dedicated fans who were doing everything they could to get their score up and get invited to parties and get perks and everything.
Yeah. And so, she's talking about Clout, which gave status and rewards to people who contributed a lot. And I remember part of it was organic enthusiasm, and part of it was recognition for good desirable behavior. And as I recall, the rewards weren't really significant. Like, you couldn't make a living through Clout. Like, you could get free booze and, maybe get invited to a party, but it never became like a job. And I think that's a really important thing to also consider. If, for those of you who are building loyalty programs or any kind of status kinds of systems or avatars, it's really, like, I believe that the minute you start giving people real value, like money, for what they're doing, it changes the nature of the relationship. Instead of being something that they do because they're appreciated, they're doing it because it's a job. And so if you think about the way you feel when, to go back to my United example, when you get a free upgrade, you don't feel like they care about you. At least I don't. I don't feel like they care about me. Like, oh, Robbie, you've probably been on the road all day and you're probably exhausted. Let us put you in first class. I'm like, no, I earned that because I'm buying all these plane tickets and I'm on the plane every week, and it is a dubious distinction to be a 1K, let me tell you. Right? Did you have another example? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. In terms of what to think about when building your organization, I think the main difference is the way you treat people and the relationship you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
That a transactional approach and also how you approach support. Maybe you hire someone young at the support position, and when you move into a member's approach, you're looking for a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And a relationship many times mean that you put that person's need in front of your own, and you trust that that person puts your needs in front of his or her own. So it means that you mention stuff that you aren't asked for. You mention negative stuff about the products that you haven't built yet, maybe, or you care about them to succeed so much that you almost forget about yourself.
Yeah.
And they feel the authenticity and that you're a real person.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Is that if you can behind every B in B2B, there's an H, right? There's a human. And, we spend a lot of time at work, and we want to be recognized, like all these needs to belong, to be recognized for our contributions. We want that at work just as much as we want that at home and on the weekend. We spend more time at work. And so having those kinds of relationships, even with vendors, people that you do business with, can be very meaningful. And as you said, if I am going out of my way to help you, the likelihood is you'll go out of your way to cut me some slack as well. And, I just read somewhere there was I forget who said this, but somebody was saying, if you want to know who's a really good salesperson, look at the people who close deals on December 31st. Because the way you close a deal on December 31st is you call your customer and you say, I need this deal to hit my quota. And they do it because of the relationship. So it's a signal that there's a trusted relationship and that the customer is willing to say, okay, I'll buy in Q4 rather than waiting till next year. I'll make it happen. So I totally agree with you that having the real relationship on both sides is really critical, and it means that it has to be across the whole organization. The other thing that I'll say about this is that all the stuff that I'm saying is like motherhood and apple pie until your company hits a bump, and then they say, let's just go for short-term revenue. Right? We're just going to charge them this quarter for that thing. We're not going to give it away. We're not going to introduce that new feature as part of the current tiers. We're going to make a new tier and we're going to charge them more because we can get that money. And the minute you do that, it changes the way the customers feel about you, and it's really hard to go back. And an example, this Netflix example that I alluded to earlier, when they went from, I think it was $13.99 to have streaming and DVDs out at a time. And then when they had a lot of issues with their costs, because when they were small, they were able to get really advantageous deals on the content because nobody thought that it would impact their business, and other studios thought it would impact their business. And as Netflix grew, when they had to renew those agreements, the terms changed. There was more competition in the market. It was sort of like a perfect storm. And a company that I think has generally been incredibly transparent and fair-minded about their offering and the way they relate to their customers, they suddenly said, hey, great news, everybody. Instead of, paying $13.99, now you can pay $9.99 and get unlimited 3 DVDs out at a time, or you can pay $7.99 and get streaming. And so, every kid with a third grade math education can say, well, gosh, $9.99 plus $7.99 is more than $13.99. That is not good news. That is bad news. And that was, their stock took a huge dive, and it took them a while to recover from that. And I believe it was because of the lack of transparency. If they had said, hey, look, our costs have gone up, we haven't raised our prices in a long time, and now we're going to raise our prices because it's the only way we can serve you, I think that they probably, you can never know for sure, but I think they would have had enough goodwill that they could have, done a more elegant job of weathering that storm. So there's 5 big moments of challenge that I see with membership economy companies. The first is getting just from the idea to the startup, because in a lot of cases, if you're depending on community or you're depending on critical mass or you're depending on big data to inform the decisions, and that's the value proposition, is that we're going to give you analytics, just getting started can be a huge hurdle. A second challenge is organizations that are trying to go from offline to online, which I don't think is the case here. But I've worked with a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out how do you take the relationships that are established offline and bring them online and provide the same amount of value using a different medium. Third one is going from business as usual to competitive disruption. And this happens all the time, and it's never from the person that you think or the company that you think of as your competitor. It always seems to come from left field. And then there's the maturing process. So if your value proposition of your SaaS offering is that it's new and edgy and different than the main competitors, and that you can move more rapidly and more nimbly than the big companies, at some point you get so big that you can't do that anymore, and then you're stuck because you don't actually have an interesting value proposition. So making that transition from being one of the cool guys to not so cool is something that is, it's certainly what they would call a first-class problem, that like, gosh, we're so big that we're not edgy and small anymore, but it's also a real challenge in terms of building the relationships with your customers. If you only attract the cool kids, then when you get to a certain size, they're going to go look for the next cool thing. I did work with one of the big, I'm not going to say which one, but a really big consumer services company. And my recommendation was go after the moms because they control the $1 trillion budget. And the company was like, we don't want moms because they're not cool. They didn't quite say that to me, but they're like, well, we don't really, because I'm a mom, but they were like, well, we really want to get the young engineer who really understands our technology. And this was like for an e-commerce company, And what ended up happening is they tried to stay cool, even though they had a really giant footprint, and the business really suffered. And the last example, and I know there's some Intuit people in the room. I actually have Intuit as one of my case studies in the book because of the transition from an ownership model where you buy the box software to an access model with QuickBooks Online. And I compared it to Adobe, who did, I think of it as one is like a gradual shift where, Intuit had the two businesses side by side for a really long time. And Adobe just said one day, boom, if you want Creative Cloud, if you want Adobe Creative, it's in the cloud now. And if you don't want it, if you don't want to go in the cloud, we don't have an offering for you anymore. We will not be supporting it anymore, the box software. And I would just point out that in Adobe's case, the way that I see it is they figured out who they were going to lose when they made that transition, and it was a cost they were willing to bear. So in their case, it was the hobbyists, the people that were on a budget, not the professional designers who worked in large organizations or in design studios. Those people said, gosh, if you give me a forever transaction and promise to keep improving the product and providing me access to other people like me and provide me with all kinds of inspiration and support and help on an ongoing basis, and I always have the latest tools without having to go buy them, I am delighted to pay that because actually I'm not even paying it, my boss is. And the people who left were the ones that were, using 3-year-old box software and saying, wait, but I don't want to buy something every month. I like using my old software. It's good enough for the wedding invitations or the restaurant menus that I'm doing. Yes? Oh, yes. So what I was going to say about Amazon, and I had a case study here and I pulled it, but Amazon, started as an e-commerce company, right? And that's incredibly transactional. And over the past several years, they have moved closer and closer to being a membership company. They've done tons of experiments in membership. Amazon Prime, the most successful, using it not just to get people to buy more stuff, but also as a Trojan horse to change consumer behavior as they introduce new offerings. So as a way of getting people to think of Amazon for video, or think of Amazon for music, Amazon for food. They've really used that as kind of a gathering factor for membership and to serve their mission, which is around removing all friction from the consumer buying process. You're welcome. I wanted to share this, example of disruption. So, 20 years ago, if I'd been doing this group would have been like the AMA or, the American Product Management Association or something like that. And we might have been, this might have been, if this were our annual big spectacular meeting, we might have been in a room with a bunch of, banners of a million different sponsors, and there would have been no free food, and it would have been fine. But if you look at what Marketo's doing for marketers, they have huge name speakers. They have really cool, fun events, Marketing Nation. They have, Elton John and, big name performers, and they gather a crowd. And something that I found really interesting in the space of disruption is, the associations. I do a lot of speaking. Since my book came out, I've been asked to do a lot of speaking to associations, which is a group that I didn't really know since most of my career I've been, here in Silicon Valley in the software world. They were like, well, the thing is, millennials, they're not joiners and they don't like to gather. And, Dan, when did you start this Meetup group that has 5,400 people? So 5,400 people in 3.5 years, right? People want to gather, people want to connect. It's just they don't want to connect like that anymore. They want to connect in ways that feel more authentic, that feel better, that leverage technology, that allow people to connect even when they're not physically in the same place. And I don't think in a million years, the AMA would have expected that their competition was going to come from a software company, but that's what's been happening. As companies move into, beyond SaaS and into membership, they are starting to think about, okay, who are all these people that we're serving, these personas that we've gathered together? They have common interests, certainly around how to use the product, like a user group, but more importantly, how to think about their careers, how to think about the challenges that their business is facing. And this software company becomes a gathering place for business minds and business conversations, which is changing the way that associations have to think about their role. Last big idea I wanted to share is the idea of a super user. So we were kind of alluding to that. A super user is somebody who's more than just a great customer. They actually, and a great customer for me is somebody who pays you and uses your products and services in the way that they're intended and gets lots of value from it, and ultimately, spends more frequently and more deeply over time. But a super user goes beyond that, and they actually dedicate their own time and resources to help your business. So these are people who give you feedback on your product. These are people who are willing to speak at your events. These are people who make referrals. These are people who help with onboarding, so who offer support for new customers and, are willing to, take a call, not just the reference call, but the, hey, I bought the product and now I have 12 questions call. So super users are really desirable. The thing to remember, though, is that if I'm a super user for you and I'm dedicating my time to helping your organization, I'm not going to be able to, spend that same amount of time with another organization. So it's kind of a limited resource. One company that does this really well, I would argue, is Salesforce. You can't buy these shoes or these socks. These are MVP shoes and socks, and they go to Salesforce MVPs. Are you guys all familiar with the MVP program? I think there's less than 50 people worldwide who have gotten that designation. So the way it works is, I described what a super user is, somebody who refers people in, who helps people that are new or struggling in the community to use their products and services and to be successful. What? I'm not going to comment on that. And then the last thing, so it's bringing in new people, it's helping people get up and running, and it's giving feedback on products and services to product managers. And what's really interesting is that this MVP status is given to people that do that the most. So people who bring in the most referrals, give the best feedback to the product managers, and are the most willing to serve as support and inspiration for their peers through user groups, through speaking at local events, through writing and being case studies. And do you know what the reward is for being an MVP other than the awesome shoes? It's the opportunity to do the same things at a higher level. You're able to speak at larger events. You're able to give feedback to more senior people. And you get a little bit of swag, but the main thing is that it confers status on these people. So again, it's very small. You get little prizes, free entrance into certain events, free stuff. But really the draw is being part of this community, being able to associate with other people that are like you, having an influence on a product that matters a lot in getting your job done, and being seen as a real leader when maybe in your company, people don't fully understand what it is you actually do, and don't confer much status on you at all for your job. So I would argue that in some of these cases, their relationship with Salesforce is more important than their relationship with their employer. They're more likely to stay, in the Salesforce ecosystem than with that particular company. And one of the sort of off-record stories that I've heard from Salesforce folks and from a couple of other places is the incredible job market that is going on around these industry-oriented software companies where the administrators are coming to the vendor and saying, I want another job, and customers are coming to the vendor and saying, we want to hire. And it could almost be like a separate line of business, except that it's in direct conflict with helping the customer be successful if you're helping to lure away their employees to go work for other companies. So that's the Salesforce story. The last thing I wanted you to think about is what features could support ongoing engagement and referrals. So, I talked a little bit about how, onboarding and customer success are really both critical to the success of the customer and to retention, but also great ways to learn about new features. And I'm wondering, actually, I'll change it a little bit. I'm wondering to what extent in your organizations there's a virtuous cycle between the onboarding process, the customer success process, and feeding that information back in the form of ideas for products, referrals that will encourage referrals, onboarding, and engagement. Yeah.
Hi, I have a SaaS platform, and we start with drip campaigns that are triggered when someone comes on, when someone expresses interest, when they schedule a demo. It also triggers workflows that include either interrupting that drip campaign or phone calls or one-on-one webinars. We have actually, we built an LMS, a learning management system, as part of our platform. So we eat our own dog food and use that as well. Just a lot of hands-on checking in with people, either via email or via picking up the phone and talking to people and connecting with them on social media as well.
Awesome. And do you find that the whole organization is involved in bringing kind of market information, feature needs, behavioral feedback to the product team?
Yeah. Say that again.
So I'm wondering to what extent the rest of the organization is helping the product team develop insights about what else is needed. Like how much of it is coming from the data? Like you talked about the data. I wasn't sure if the data systems, the drip campaigns and the learning management system, if those are your products that you sell or if those are the way that you interact with your customers.
Yes.
It's all of it.
Because it's a complete marketing stack and sales stack and customer success all in one platform.
Okay. Oh, I see. So that's what you're selling.
So yeah.
Okay.
So we use
your own dog.
We use our tools.
Okay.
And we've grown over the years as a result of requests from customers. Oh, can you add this? Can you do this? Something as simple as can we color code our activities in CRM to coincide with Google Calendar.
Same colors.
And the practice has always been, if it makes sense for the universe of users, then it gets added to the never-ending to-do list. And depending on how cool it is, in other words, is it going to be something that people are going to get really excited about, and how easy or difficult it is to implement, it moves up the list to get implemented. And if it doesn't make sense, we tell them why.
Yeah, that's a key. I think that's another key point is the feedback loop and making sure that somebody gives feedback about why features aren't being added, especially in this long relationship. The dark side of the membership economy is that people feel so attached to your business and so connected that they feel like of course you're going to incorporate the features that they've asked for because I'm part of the community. And of course they're never going to raise their prices because I'm part of the community. And so, change is really hard, I think, in the membership economy. I'm glad to talk more about that. At this point, I'm going to pause and see if there are questions.
Hello, Mariano. I there's something, again, we are all in marketing, we're all in sales, and we are in customer success because it's again the funnel is more like a sand clock, right? So there's definitely overlapping, or could be overlapping, in communications and who gets in the right to talk and so forth, and we try to be very customer centric and respectful and so forth. But any company or any that you saw that does a good job there, or any tips on how to do it as a team?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question, especially as companies grow. I mean, the push and pull between being a small company where everybody can do it because you're all sitting at the same table, and customer success that's next to products, that's next to marketing. And then over time, when it's a much bigger organization, you worry that people are going to get too many messages, or with a complicated marketing stack that there's too much going on. You have to be an expert to understand where you fit into the priorities. So I think that's the challenge. What I've seen are clear delineations of ownership and close collaboration. I don't have anything really better to tell you than that, but that's where I've seen the best results, is that in those processes in between, when something, like once something's been built in, it's a working automated process, and the challenges that I've seen happen when something new emerges that isn't already part of the process. So you say, oh, we need to get feedback, and it's not part of our regular feedback process. Those are the places where I've seen challenges arise. Yeah. Yeah.
Going back to the onboarding experience, what are the costs and benefits of adding friction to onboarding? I know we want to create an authentic experience, so just want to talk about your best takes or best practices on what tactics to use, like progressive profiling or contextual tutorials. What have you seen that works well in order to provide an authentic experience to create a habit-forming feel for the consumer?
Yeah. So the thing that I would say about that is that it depends. I mean, without knowing what your business is, it's a little bit hard to say. But what I've seen is if there's a way to give value without getting a lot of information. I mean, the part of it, and what you're saying is about, is it free or is it paid? Is it, a huge corporate decision, or is it somebody say, I'm going to give it a flyer and try it for a week and then see if I want to continue? I think that the most important thing is that you have to give them, if they haven't already committed trust to you by paying you, you have to give them value immediately. And so I would say that the first thing that you want to do is give them value before you earn the right to ask for more information, or in some cases to ask for a credit card or to ask for payment. The things that I have seen work, or the kinds of challenges that I've seen, is, one of them is they don't know what, you have to think also about what are you trying to accomplish? What are the steps that lead to a happy customer? So, for example, in some products, they're saying, like when you're saying, we're going to help you do X more efficiently, you used to use a spreadsheet and now you can use our product. They're going to say, well, I don't even understand what that is. So they want like a sandbox to play in. That shouldn't require very much information, because what they're saying is, it's like almost like a marketing tool. I don't even understand what you're offering. In a case where they understand, but they don't want to give information, I would say that in those cases, you can ask for more up front, because it's sort of like, my sister worked at an ice cream store, and people would come in and say, can I taste the vanilla? She was like, it tastes like vanilla, right? Like at some point, people are like, well, I need a trial because I don't know, and I don't want to give you my information. I don't want to pay you because I don't know. I want to see if I like it. And you're like, okay, what it is. Either you like it or you don't. So I would say for a lot of the companies here where the services maybe aren't obvious and people don't understand, I think that having some kind of a sandbox or some kind of a trial that doesn't require a lot of information is really critical to your success. But in the case where it's a known quantity, or I wouldn't. The other thing that I would say that I was just thinking of is that in some businesses, the gating factor is not the providing data, and it's not the money. It's the time required to get the system up and running. Like I did a lot of work with PayCycle, which is now part of Intuit, and this was online payroll for very small businesses. The hardest part, the biggest hurdle to get people to join was, I don't want to type in all the names of all of my employees and then indicate which markets they're in and which states they're in and figure all of that out. Once it's all set up, it's really easy, but that was the hurdle. And so what they realized was that their free trial was kind of worthless, and not requiring people's names was worthless too, because that wasn't the hurdle. The hurdle was making it as easy as possible for them to see that it would work for them. Yeah. Question here and then in the back.
Testing. Okay. So, I can't quite speak to the accuracy of the numbers, but I remember seeing somewhere recently that Netflix is doing well when it comes to net income with respect to its DVD business, but with respect to streaming, it's losing, although it obviously has much higher revenues. At the same time, if that is accurate, then Netflix is often seen as a good model, probably even one of the better models for how to properly execute a membership economy. I mean, do you have any insight into how appropriate it is to speak to the success of Netflix if its membership economy or its membership model is struggling as much as it seems to be?
Yeah, so the thing that I don't know the answer is, does that mean that they're struggling? So what I see is that the DVD business is a cash cow. And a lot of companies that I work with actually have this problem, because they're like, well, we're making a lot of money here, and this other business that our consumers or our customers are telling us they want actually requires tremendous investment, and we're not 100% sure it's going to work, because you never are. And so I would argue that that there's an investment phase. There's a lot of companies, you look at like Spotify, they're trying to do a land grab, they're losing money. You look at, like I was listening to, when I was driving, when I was actually sitting in traffic for an hour to get here from Menlo Park, I was listening to Susan Wojcicki, who runs YouTube, talking about, it's going to be several years before these investments pay off. It was several years before the investments that I made initially have paid off. So what I would say is that the membership model is about the long game, and there are plenty of companies that don't play the long game, and that's okay. In some cases, if you don't need to differentiate in sales and marketing because your advantages are patent related, regulatory, geographic, you can be on a quarterly financial model, screw the customer, right? Just they have to, you're the only gas station in Dodge, that's where they're going to get their gas. But if your customers have options, they're going to trust you. But if they see that there's a better option somewhere else and you've chosen not to do it because you don't want to make the investment, they'll jump. And we've seen that with, like I think of print to digital news. A lot of the companies didn't want to move to digital because they had big printing presses, and they had teams of people that ran those printing presses. And even though all the consumers were saying we don't need to have paper anymore, they were reluctant to make that move. And I would argue that that's more of kind of what Netflix is trying to avoid.
You're paralleling it from print to digital. You're suggesting almost this is like the next stage.
Yeah, well, going from DVD, it's a totally different business model. To be good at the DVD business, they had to have distribution centers. They had to have deals with the post office. They had to track inventory. What they do now is totally different with streaming. It requires a different investment, different skill set, different people. So, that's how I see it. Yeah. That's the other cost. Yeah. Yeah. I would also say, if you want to talk about Netflix, the other thing that I've been thinking about is that you think about all the digital content companies, so not just Netflix, but also the music, also news, also gaming, and then you look at the telcos and the cable companies that are delivering it, and then you look at the big three tech companies. It's not clear. Everybody's doing everything right now, and it's not clear who's going to win. And they're all investing as much as they possibly can, because at some point, there's going to be a battle for who actually owns the direct relationship with the customer. And if you look at them, every one of them is investing in membership right now. You look at the gaming companies, they're all moving to subscription. Video content's already moved that way. Cable companies are trying to get more customer centric and figure it out. So I think that, it's not clear who's going to win, and Netflix may lose, but the game that they're playing, I think, requires the investment. All right, that's it. The other thing that I didn't really bring up is that a lot of these, because they're playing the long game, I think venture has also changed the game, because there's this idea that you can put a lot of money in and play a long game to win a big pie, which is really different than kind of the bootstrap model, which is every quarter I've got to make enough money to pay my employees and pay my costs and have a little bit to take the family on vacation. And the model's really different now. So that's the other piece with membership, is that in some cases they're not profitable yet. Way in the back, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, we have a hyper-local website that we're using as our prototype, and we have membership. One of the things I keep thinking about are ways to take, because it's hyper-local, turn that membership from something that's through the web and turn it into something that's physical and present activities as well. Do you have good examples of that to look to for inspiration?
Facebook, Yelp. Those are the two that come right to mind. What I think about is when you're trying to build a big community, there's two ways to do it. One of them is to start in a hyper-local way, and the other is to bring an offline community online en masse. And actually, Facebook did both of those things, right? They went college by college until they had critical mass, and then they opened the doors. And they took existing personal relationships and said, okay, now you have another way to communicate. So if you think about like these associations that have annual meetings, like there was nothing to do in between the annual meetings. I just had a call from a big newspaper that does, they have these big special events for CMOs and CEOs and all these conferences. And they said, hey, we're trying to figure out our digital community strategy, because we know that they love the face-to-face, but we need to figure out how to create momentum between events. So figuring out kind of the relationship between offline and online. The other thing is, with Yelp having their live events to reward the people that participated and give them a chance to get to know each other, read each other's reviews, build relationships, was also useful. Yeah.
I'm struggling to tie the community businesses in with white labelers. And I don't know if you've spent any time thinking about companies that have tried to white label these type of services, and is there any way to succeed in that realm, or is it this very tied to brands?
Yeah, it depends on what you're trying. Again, it kind of depends on what the specifics are. But sure. Some of the examples that I think of are when an organization provides the kind of customized front end, but the community is broader reaching, or certain elements of it. So, for example, you talked about being in financial services. Mm-hmm. So maybe there's, people at, let's say you're providing this to companies, like you're saying, okay, we'll come in and everybody that works at.
But is anyone successful at that?
Is anyone
successful white labeling a service that is very community oriented? Everything that I can think of is a very branded solution, and it's not widely distributed. The community comes to that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'll have to think about it. Maybe if you give me your card, I'll.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She's saying you might not know that it's white labeled, and that's true. And then there's companies like Lithium that are communities, and I think they use the intelligence kind of in their back room to provide better experiences. But there's not. I think about the difference between community and network, right? And the network is kind of access to insights from the larger group, and the community is about social, and the social part is limited to the white labeled group, but the network what they're working on with their kind of science of social is going broader. But let me think about it and get back to you. And I'll take one more, and then I'm going to wrap up, but I'll stay as long as people want to ask questions.
Hey, so going back to the difference between subscription and membership, I just think for me, membership implies that I have some kind of meaningful relationship with other people in the membership, right? So I think of myself as having a subscription to Netflix. I don't think of myself as a member of Netflix. I'm a member of a gym, and I'm a member of a church, and so a soccer league. So I have, and there's stickiness to it, right? Because if I were to leave, I would lose those connections, right?
Yeah.
While when I'm a subscriber, there's not as much stickiness. If a competitor comes along and they have a better offering, maybe more selection of content or a better price, I would leave at a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I was just going to make.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why the subscription and the membership sort of go together. Why are they both
that's fair.
a membership economy?
So I totally struggled with that question when I was writing the book, because I was like, okay, what is membership? And I thought of all these different things. I said, well, membership is if the customer calls himself a member, then it's a membership. Or if there's an element of community and social, then it's a membership. But then I thought, well, no, because AAA, I'm definitely a member of AAA, but I don't know if any of my friends are members of AAA. I don't really care, but I definitely feel members. So for me, I think about membership is how I feel about my relationship with the company, that I feel like they've got my back, I'm in it for the long term, I'm not considering options. I think people used to feel that way with Netflix. I think now there's a lot of other options. People are looking at other options. I think you don't need community to have membership, because community is about social. The other thing that I would point out is that I found that the term membership is loaded. So a lot of companies will say, or a lot of individuals will say, well, I'm not a member of that, so that's not a membership business because I don't feel like I'm a member, like what you just said. That happens all the time, and I totally get it. I feel like I'm a member with some, I don't with others, mostly for personal experience reasons, sometimes because of the community. What I would argue is that, and I even tell my clients this, like, you don't have to call it a membership. You don't have to say, hey, we're a SaaS company, but now we're a membership company, and now you're all members, and it's going to be really different. They don't have to know it. The thing that matters is that the company is treating the people they serve like members. It's a mind shift at the company. So I had a conversation today with a software company I'm working with, and we've been talking about what are we going to call it externally, and do we need to change? This is a company that already has a subscription, SaaS business, and they're, we're working together on membership. And they're like, well, do we have to change what we call them and change it everywhere that we write about it or every time we communicate with them? And what we realize is that the biggest issue for this organization is that they're incredibly quarterly focused. A big company, they've been around a long time, they've had subscription a long time, and they're totally focused on the bottom line. They're totally run by finance people. And what they realize is the most important thing is that internally they use the word member so that they're reminded of how they're supposed to treat the people they serve, that they're not just, so for example, this company says, we don't really care if they don't use the software because they keep paying us every year because we're safe, right? That is not, and I'm paraphrasing, that is not how they say it. They're very nice people, but they say, look, hey, at the end of the day, they have the right to subscribe. They don't have to use the product. They might just have it as insurance, but as long as they're subscribed and they're paying us, then we have to assume they're happy. And I would say you don't want to confuse inertia and loyalty, but a lot of organizations do that. And by focusing on membership as a guiding principle, I think some of that goes away. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to just wrap up. Secret to the forever transaction is that organizations need to love the mission of their customers and the customers themselves more than any particular product that they've built, any kind of person that they have on their team, or any process that's already been in place. To learn more, the person who answered the first question, who was that person? It was over here somewhere. They should get a book. Are they gone? I think they're gone. You? The very first question. Who was the very first person? It was she. Okay. So if you give me your card, I'll get you a book. There's 5 books that Dan's going to give to people who are in the #lean product. An extra book. for being, yeah. And, if you want to be in touch, I'm obviously a big believer in community and membership and long-term relationships. So if I can ever be helpful to any of you, please feel free to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn, and if you give me an invitation, I'll respond. And if you have specific questions that arise today, I'm happy to hang around. And if they arise next week or in 3 weeks, and you say, "Hey, I was at Dan's meetup," I'll be glad to do my best to try to give you a thoughtful response. So with that, thank you very much for your time and attention. It's been a lot of fun.